Well, hi. Recently, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Kevin Lynch. Kevin was formerly the creative director at Oatly. And when I recorded this, I was in Canada, he was in Malmö, Sweden, and it was just a fantastic conversation. I had issues though at the start of the conversation with a little bit of echo. And during that, Kevin talked about his incredible career with BBDO, ultimately also spending time with the Shanghai American School, where he was the director of marketing, and how he transformed the school's concept of even what marketing was, and then ultimately Oatly. But this conversation is so much more than just about Oatly and about brands and about creativity. It's also about a couple of key highlights were trust and the importance of trust in forming the kind of pivotal point in driving creativity within business and driving results, frankly. Kevin talks about the Department of Mind Control at Oatly, which was fantastic. The role of counter thinking, and he also gets us into this idea of ideas and where do the best ideas come from. And he'll share an interesting anecdote about how Oatly explored starting a law firm for that would support all companies, all non-dairy companies who were being taken on by dairy. Terrific story there. It's edgy, provocative. He talks about bravery and courage and just getting results in a world where there's such a sea of sameness and this follower mentality. Uh, Kevin now has his own company called The Wrong Agency, which I love. I just love that name, right? It makes you think, kind of, you won't forget that now, The Wrong Agency. And he works with three kinds of clients. And I think even though I'd never met Kevin before, what is consistent are the attributes for his three clients and the attributes for my clients are pretty similar, right? Number one, he's looking for leaders who absolutely believe in the power of creativity to transform a business, change a culture, and deliver results. So if you have to be convinced that creativity can influence performance, well, probably not one of the clients for Kevin. Number two, huge ambitions. You know, if you think about Oatly as a small company in Sweden, they decided to take on the food industry, and they did. That's a massive ambition. And then the third is a company where the hard work is still yet ahead of them, not where the hard work's been done. So that's who Kevin likes working with, because that's where he's been really successful in the past. I love this conversation. It has so much to do with just organizational transformation, getting results with teams, how to work with people. There is so much value in here. I hope you enjoy the conversation just as half as much as I did, just having the conversation with Kevin. A wonderful mind, some real wisdom in here from his experience at Oatly. I hope you enjoy it. Really piqued my interest in wanting to talk to you is that even though you wrote a story, and I'll see if I can share it here, it should be able to come up. So this was the piece that you had written. Let me just make sure here that you can see it. You probably can. Can you see
Sure.
that? Yep. This was the piece that you're written in.
I can't, but I'm familiar with it.
Okay, okay. So it was the one in the drum, and I'll just read the first paragraph, and then I'd love you to bring it to life because so in the work that we do around helping teams pursue great ambitions, I just saw this was not something that you wrote about necessarily business and management and leadership. You wrote it very much from the perspective, a creative perspective of what you'd gone through. But I read it and I just sort of everything jumped out at me about how this was just so applicable. And so if you haven't read it, if people haven't read, I'm going to read just the first paragraph and maybe one line, and then ask you to kind of bring some color to it, Kevin. You said,
Sure.
this summer I was let go from Oatly, and before my hypnotist succeeds in helping me forget the whole episode had happened, I figure I should share some things I learned in there. In the highly unlikely event that you'll find it beneficial, it starts with trust. That to me was sort of, this just doesn't apply to what your experience, but to so much of the work that I do, certainly, and the leaders I work with. So take us through some of the context of what that was. We can provide the link to the article. I actually thought that this might have been the preface to a book that you might write, because, and maybe if you haven't thought about it, it might be something to think about, because I think there's so much in here, actually, Kevin, that you could really start to build out. But give us some context.
Yeah, for sure. So the context of the article overall was really that, Oatly, I think, has been a source of fascination for a lot of folks. That, a lot of different brands, when they kind of have to pull together how they want to communicate, or communicating in a unique way, or taking a counter position to the category, Oatly shows up in a lot of mood boards, according to our friends in marketing and in other companies. And so this really was sort of an opportunity to kind of go, look, I know you're all fascinated with this place, but there's a lot of things that they do that are frankly really obvious. So to me, that was a little bit of an undertone. I don't think there was anything, sort of revolutionary, but the response that this has generated, as you kind of alluded to, kind of says how rare some of these things are that are happening. And so the first one really is around trust. That and again, it's born. I understand the applicability, from a broader standpoint. It was born out of looking at creative leadership, within organizations, and the marketing people, even
Yeah.
as sort of a function within a larger company. And you if you look at it, there's a lot of distrust that's kind of built into the system, whether it be the measurability and the justification for the expenditures, whether it be
Yeah.
just sort of where they're sitting in the organization, and
Yeah.
their level of voice at whatever corporate table type things have. And the thing that I enjoyed, and as different as Oatly and Shanghai American School are as organizations, that trust really was there at SAS. And, there was the head of school who just said, "Hey, I've hired you to do marketing. None of us know how to do marketing. We're trusting you to do it." And then at Oatly, it was really kind of embedded in a relationship between John Schoolcraft, who headed up sort of the brand redo, and Toni Petersson, who took over as a CEO of Oatly in I believe it was 2012, and just the fact that they had that level of trust, and so that transferred to the art department as a whole,
Yeah.
and it allowed us to say, hey, we know what people are going to spark to. We know how to, create these relationships. We know how to spark these conversations that go beyond anything that the brand would ever be able to afford. And a lot of times that's not going to grow out of the requests from kind of more logic based and rational based sort of thinkers within the organization, no matter where they sit. So it really was kind of an understanding of what creativity can bring in terms of business results to the organization. I think the other thing that was really interesting that they did when they set it up was, John makes a big deal at various speeches of saying, I said I will only take the job if I can kill the marketing department. And so they killed the marketing department, and you can look at the Oatly Department of Mind Control, which is the ultimately the organization that was created, and say, "Gosh, you do a lot of things that that a marketing department does. Are you
You
sure that
killed.
you've actually killed it?"
Yeah.
But I think just giving it that nomenclature allowed them to kind of go, like, no one knows where a department of mind control belongs in an organization. And so, like, by kind of taking away that context that people are familiar with and maybe have biases about,
Yes.
it allowed them to really, and again, it's through the trust between John and Tony, but it allowed them to, John and the Only Department of Mind Control, to really kind of play a much more influential role beyond just, hey, what do the ads look like? And so, sparking a bit of creativity and sparking a bit of counter thinking of, I know we're supposed to be priced like this, but why are we what if we price it like that? I know distribution is supposed to be X, but the whole logic of heading off to the very top cafes when they first enter a market, and really owning that barista community. I mean, that sort of tip of the cultural spear. I mean, that wouldn't have happened in sort of these more logical,
Right.
hey, these are the channels that you go to, and off you go. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's that trust really has benefited the organization in just a ton of ways.
You know, so trust was the fact it was the second line in that article was kind of very very clever, because trust everything depends on trust. So I see so much organizational dysfunction on the basis of trust. How is that? Because trust, in my view, is a little bit of an equation, right? It's an algorithm. There's a you earn it and you can lose it, and you give it and you can get it. So there's forces on both sides of this thing. If we if we want to think of laws of motion, how was that trust was it earned in the first instance, or was it granted sort of as an assumptive and yours to be lost? So talk a little bit about that, because I think that that's quite fascinating, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the interesting things about having two experiences to draw from, Shanghai American School and Oatly. At Oatly, that trust was embedded in a relationship between John and Toni that had been around a decade or so beforehand. They knew each other well. I don't remember what their professional relationship was, but they knew each other well enough that when Toni took the job, John was, one of the first calls that he made saying, "Hey,
Come on over. Yeah.
get your butt over here. I need you." And
Yeah.
so there you can say, hey, that trust was earned through a ton of interactions that they had, and then as John and the gang continued to make good decisions, that trust grew even stronger,
Mhm.
and what have you. At Shanghai American School, I had no relationship with the head of school
Right.
previously, and it really was. I think that there tends to be a bias among the C level of looking at marketing and putting them under a little bit more of a not doubt, but I suppose a little bit more of a prove it to us
Prove yourself.
than I think some of the yeah, the more so than some of the other functions of business, and maybe some of it's deservedly so, maybe not. I think the nice thing about about Shanghai American School is the head of school really didn't have that bias. I could look across the other disciplines of the sort of leadership team that he pulled together, and he just trusted all of us to do our jobs. It's like, yeah, that's what you're hired to do. You should know this stuff. And so for us, I knew, I think a big part of marketing successes lies in the fact that there was some tension created, and quite often with Oatly, we've picked a couple of different enemies. The big one, obviously, being dairy.
Yes.
At SAS, we weren't afraid of kind of pissing people off either, and that's not quite as welcome in a school environment. So, I mean, the head of school at one point, just was so infuriated, and he said, no one has been a bigger pain in the ass for me than marketing, and I took it as a bit of a compliment. I'm like, that's so now I get a raise. Is this the because
I'm doing my
yeah,
job.
good,
I'm doing
thank
my job.
you. No, it really is, and I think that's that might be part of the the inspiration to keep marketing on a little bit of a shorter leash than some of the other disciplines. I don't, I'm
Yeah.
sure C level folks can speak about that better than I, but it really does. It feels like in a lot of organizations we kind of start out from the back, and to me, take looking at the SAS experience and the Oatly experience was like, if you don't if you don't have us start out from the back, if you do, count on us to do the job that you've hired us to do, really great things can happen.
Well, that's interesting because the you think of Oatly and you think provocative, you think edgy, you think non-traditional, and you're right about the enemy piece too. Dairy being the enemy, and then at one point, I think it was I'd read that I don't know, the National Association of Baristas had decided it wasn't a coffee drink unless it had milk, which was ludicrous. So you took that on too. Um,
Sure.
the power of identifying that enemy, I imagine, did a lot internally as much as it did for a brand. You suddenly found the Oatly team feeling that they have sort of allegiance and tightness. Was that intentional? I mean, I'm sure you didn't not know that was going to happen.
Yeah, so so Oatly has been around since the mid '90s, which few people know.
Yeah.
I mean, it really. I think it's pretty rare to look at a successful mission-driven brand that wasn't born that way. I mean, that's typically like that was in their DNA from the beginning. With Oatly, it really wasn't. It was born out of a good lot, a scientific discovery in the University of Lund, just north of Malmö here. And it was, they created the product and applied it to the most logical audience, which was vegans and lactose intolerant people. And that's kind of the dusty aisle where it sat until Toni and John and the gang took over in 2012, 2013, and said, we could actually stand for something a bit more. And so the first piece that they did, which I think is it's a bit like the red clipboards. The first thing they did was they said, "All right, we need to change the mindset of our internal audience because right now we are a food processing company, and we need to think of ourselves as a lifestyle brand and one that is standing for sustainability and nutrition and and transparency and like all these sort of bigger topics
Yes.
than just um, that sort of functional benefit. So they created what they called the Book of Change, or the Change Book, and they gave that to all the employees. And it was really just sort of this big rallying cry to say you do have to kind of shift your mindset. And I think that really provided that rallying cry for people who were at a modestly successful company doing just fine, thank you, to really kind of go, no, we're not just fine, thank you. We have the opportunity to be make a much bigger impact in the world. So this is what it's going to take.
I wanted to ask you about that because I was, it was that moment to your point where it had languished, or it hadn't languished, actually, it was doing fine, but it wasn't avant-garde in the sense that it was now something that stood out. So that change book, my ears pricked up with that because changing mindsets is easier said than done. Um, I would suggest that putting your money where your mouth is, i.e., by empowering your marketing team to do what they need to do to kind of push boundaries and become known for something differently, is a demonstration of that. But from your perspective, and I know sort of it's a different capacity as consultants, as partners, we're on the inside, but we're kind of on the outside too.
Yeah.
What did you experience in terms of that mindset change, Kevin? How did you sort of what was visible and sort of what was experienced? How did they do that?
So by the time I got to Oatly, I was, say that any job I've had over the last 20 years has been a good meaty contribution. It was start something or build something or change something. And at Oatly, are we allowed to swear on this
Yes, yeah, yeah, sure.
conversation?
Yeah,
So at Oatly, it was don't fuck it up, and I mean that as in they had such great pieces already put into place that it really was around executing, and
yeah,
being handed a box of toys and saying go play. And I think we played in really memorable ways and stretched, sort of how the brand has come to life. But ultimately, it wasn't nearly as big of a contribution as elsewhere. And
yeah,
so to your question of that changing that mindset, the mindset was already changed by the time I got there.
yeah.
I'll give you a great example of that. It was literally it's my day one story. So I come over there, they hand me 10 different markets, one of which is Spain, and we were right on the brink of launching It's Like Milk but Made for Human, and that's sort of a standard, soften the ground, introduce the brand type campaign or type of messaging that we'll do when we go into new markets. And so, the whole plan was already together for Spain. The media was there, social media was ready to run, everything was set, and we'd gotten word that the dairy lobby in Spain, well, like some other countries, was getting ready to sue us because they weren't they didn't like the line quite as much as we did, and so we meet in this room, and there's a half dozen different disciplines, and in this conversation, which should be very like very tactical of like, okay, what date are we going to do it? When are we going to release X? Who's doing what,
Yeah,
file preparation, all that good type stuff. And in that conversation, someone goes, it was just coming off one of the plant-based meat alternatives that was getting sued somewhere else in Europe, and that we had continued to see these lawsuits. And someone said, you know what, we should just start a law firm for all the plant-based companies, so that as we're getting sued by the dairy lobbies and the meat lobbyists, like we can all kind of band together and just sort of have a legal resource to sort of protect, because ultimately our mission as a company was to grow the plant-based movement. It wasn't,
yeah,
yes, we wanted our share, but that was sort of the bigger goal. And I would say, like, if you ever want to know how good your organization is, come up with a great idea. And a great idea will usually mess up someone's timeline. not meet someone's expectations. It'll push budgets. Perhaps it'll screw something up because it's at its heart it's really not what people had prepared for.
Yeah.
And to me, that was a really cool idea. And I looked around at the half dozen people, all of whom had put in a ton of hours preparing this campaign. And as soon as that idea was thrown out, they're like, "Yeah, yeah, no, that's a better idea than running this campaign." And so we spent the next 2 weeks exploring this idea of starting a law firm that could represent all the plant based companies. Ultimately, like even our lawyers were trying to figure out how to do it legally.
But that's
It was
brilliant.
really, and I thought it was such a great testament to the culture.
Yeah.
And so, again, going back to your point, like the mind shift had already happened. That someone could throw out an idea that completely screws up everything that had been planned, and everyone's like, "But it's a better idea. That's what we should pursue." And I think that's a really special culture.
I think you're right. I would love to have been a fly on the wall in those 2 weeks. Like, did you play around with what you would have called it? Because I can't imagine you would have called it something boring.
I don't remember what the name was, but it was something and something. It sounded like the two
Yeah.
brothers.
Yeah.
Or father son, father daughter, whatever,
Yeah.
generational type thing. Yeah, I'd already written the cheesy lawyer script for it.
Oh,
It was going to be a ton of fun. I don't remember the details.
that would have been terrific fun.
I,
That would have been fantastic.
yeah,
Well, and it's interesting.
yeah.
Carry on.
Oh, I was just going to say, just to close that story. Ultimately, we found out that regardless of how we kind of structured it, Oatly would then be legally liable for any advice that was given to any other company, and it
Yeah.
was just a a risk that even for a company that loved risk, just didn't seem like it was a smart thing to
No, that would have been moving into an entirely different niche. There's a reason why lawyers are, are, are
do.
are loathed and loved. Let's just leave it at that, right?
For
Um,
sure, for
but
sure.
it's interesting. You talk about the power of that creative idea and how the team responds when something comes in. I see teams that respond to just challenge without a level of embrace. They kind of resist the challenge, or it seems like it's a threat. There's an interesting observation. The two guys who founded the company Stripe, which is now what 80-90 billion dollar market cap, not public though, but just I guess valuation. They kind of use two approaches, and I love this because of course I love ambition. But they'll ask, is this the most ambitious plan that you could come up with? Because what we tend to do most of the time in organizations is we already start to apply not just biases but those filters. Well, we don't have 100 people, so we can't do this. Or the last time we tried something similar, our legal team said no. Or we just don't have the tech. So the idea gets filtered just before it even makes it onto it doesn't even make it onto the cutting room floor. And then they ask another question too, in addition to, is this the most ambitious plan you could come up with? And they ask the question, if you didn't have resource constraints, is this what you would do? Because a lot of the time, the resource constraint is frankly a factor of prioritization, where you've allocated your resources based on what you think is important. So if this is now the most ambitious plan, it would suggest that other things aren't that important and perhaps need to change. And asking the question is one thing, but just like you expressed with the Oatly example, I think the inability of teams to respond to that and go, you know what, maybe it's not the best idea, or maybe it is a better idea, is a good harbinger of sort of just how forward looking and forward thinking those teams might be. I think that's a really interesting observation that you made there.
Yeah.
Hey, contrast that, Kevin. I want to be mindful of time, but contrast that as well with some of the teams where you felt it didn't have the magic that Oatly had. Are there hallmarks on the other side of the equation that are kind of red flags for you as you start looking? You partner with a client, or a client says, let's talk about something. What do you look for?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you brought up the examples previously of, like, oh, well, we don't have the resources for this, we don't have whatever for that. I think it's just incredibly easy to sort of find excuses. And so I've been in parts of organizations where I don't know if I've ever worked in an organization wide where it's like people aren't going to welcome ideas. I think I've been super. are fortunate to have ones where even if it's not always everyone on their very best day, their ideas were fairly welcomed. But I think sometimes you have to consciously kind of frame things in a way to keep those voices down, or to help those voices understand that this isn't the way we're going to go about this. So, like, for example, you know decoupling authorship from ideas. Like, it's not my idea, it's not your idea, it's whatever. Hey, let's talk about this idea. And I think, again, it's there's simple language things, but I think to recognize ideas as almost like this third party entity helps to kind of flatten the emotions that might happen. The other part is, as you're looking at ideas, one of the things that I always try and do is you're seeing a bunch of ideas. There are always ideas that people don't like, and always, as you said, like that, these rational things of like, this can't work because of X. It's like,
Yeah.
and just to go, I don't care what you don't like. I don't want to hear one fucking thing about you not
Yeah.
liking something. Tell me what you like and why you like it. Let's start there. And
Yes.
so, it's a really simple thing, but it's like all of a sudden you can be in a room of like 80 ideas, and suddenly you're talking about six that people are really excited about. It's like, okay, that's a totally different energy. and
Yes.
and it also, without specifically saying to people, we're going to talk about how to do this, not if we should do this. But
Yes.
that's kind of the message that I get. And so even people who might have a tendency to find that, to pick on the negative, even then they're kind of going, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And at some point, you always say, so we're really excited about these six ideas. What could make them even better? And that's where, good critical, thought, and like, you're not trying to ignore the conversation
Yeah.
necessarily, but I think you just need to consciously frame it in a way to where, again, you're going to create the energy and enthusiasm within the room, that
Yeah.
everyone will listen to the good angel on their shoulders, not
Yeah.
the group, not the grouse.
Well, and this is why I find it so fascinating, and the parallels between what you've talked about, and of course, you're coming at it from the point of view of a creative relationship you have with the team and a client. But I'm also looking at it from the viewpoint of a production manager in a factory who's trying to get a shift team, day shift, night shift, afternoon shift, to own or to want to own ideas of how they could improve operations. Because no one, my philosophy is no one wants to show up and have a bad day. But yet at the end of the day, when people look back and they're frustrated, it's like, well, why can't we take some of that frustration out of the system? So even though you've talked about it from the idea of, what can we get excited about and what will work for us and how can we do it, so much of that is a parallel over to, whether it's a nursing manager managing a team of nurses in a hospital, or, as I say, production foreman in a plant environment, trying to get the best out of people to to move that forward. I want to ask you tactically, how do you decouple authorship from the idea?
So part of it is simply a language thing. One of the other things is, this is going to sound very heavy-handed, but at BBDO, for example, I led a lot of multidisciplinary teams, often with other agencies that are represented. So you'll be talking to maybe four or five different. You'll have a social media team, a digital team, a shopper marketing team, or what have you. Some of whom would just as soon like to take BBDO's business. And
Yes.
so there's this sort of natural tension. So part of it was, hey, first off, look, we all have people in our organization who need to fight over the pie of this client. They're going to fight over it. We're going to solve problems. So
Right.
let them
So
do their thing. Let
clarifying
us do our
those kind
thing.
of
But
operating, those ground rules.
totally. But then, you look at kind of in the sort of creative process, and you go, when can we potentially open things up to anyone contributing, and sort of treating it as that. So you'll say, the shopper market people can come in early on when you normally wouldn't have that. So you say, hey, we're just open to ideas. At BBDO, there was a really lovely description that the head creative guy had, which was, an idea should be text message simple. And if you think about it, it really like it's a great way to kind of judge an idea. It's a little bit like a press release headline.
Yes, yes,
It's like
yeah,
if you can't explain it in that, then where all of a sudden people see the twist on the logic, see the surprise or the that sort
yeah.
of law broken, then it's probably not much there. So I forgive the long-winded explanation, but what we would do is if you're going to contribute ideas early on, here's the format you need to do. It needs to be printed on this size paper with this typeface in this like in basically so everything looks exactly the same.
Hmm.
Ultimately, as you're going through it, you're seeing who did what idea. But again, it's like it's just this nice half step away to say, it's not your agency logo underneath. It's not like, oh, this is this group's ideas because
Yeah,
they're all in the yellow and the over the
yeah.
year they're in the blue. Like so, I think anytime you can kind of visually and verbally sort of even the playing field, I think that's really helpful. And again, just anytime you're referencing an idea, it's not so and so's idea. It never is. It's this idea, and really like being super conscious of describing it in that sort of third person way.
Mm.
Again, it helps. You can't fully remove it, but I think that stuff really helps.
I think the idea there that you're giving weight to the team winning as opposed to the individual winning, right? So as a
Very
team,
much.
we'll
Yeah.
we'll deliver something. There was one thing that I also want to share that just really was exciting, I thought, and it was this idea of from the article that you wrote, and I thought you summed it up really nicely. You talked about revolution and not evolution. And I'll read again just a little bit. You said, before becoming the Oatly you know, the company spent almost 20 years being the Oatly you ignored. And you touched on that. And then you kind of made it real for us in terms of the FMCG rules. And I use that in inverted commas, right, of what it could do and what it said, the packaging. And I thought this was just incredible that, it said enriched with calcium and vitamins or vitamins. And then it said exactly the same one at the bottom. And no one had thought to challenge that or question that. So just this idea of revolution and not evolution, that's sometimes hard, I would imagine, because the team there felt that they had been doing a good enough job. So you are somewhat critical about it, but you need to be. But you also sort of want to
Yeah.
build upon that. How do you strike that balance there? Because I think it could be one step wrong and you kind of detonate a little implosion.
Yeah, for sure. So I can't speak to the sort of interpersonal challenges that people felt. I will say that the company has been a great success story, so you don't hear too many stories about people getting hearts broken. But there are a couple of stories where someone came up to Tony or John and said, "I think you're ruining this company," or what have you. So there was definitely still that tension. But I think in terms of the choice that they made and the choice that certainly marketing people can make is I'm a huge believer in just in the power of anchoring, and that if you're anchored in, okay, this is what we did last year, you just don't stray from that. Like there were like that was a comfortable choice you made, and so if it didn't quite have that reaction, it really takes kind of guts and discipline to go, you know what, let's wipe the slate clean. Let's start from scratch here. And I think I've seen so many marketers where their new package design, it's like, yeah, like I could tell what your old package design looked like based on your new one. It's like, yes, it's and with Oatly, if you look at their original, if you Google Oatly old package design or whatever, you will come across it, and it will look, it sat totally invisible on a shelf for about 20 years. And if they would have taken this, evolution kind of format, they wouldn't have gotten, just wouldn't have gotten as far. The personality would have, they would have been more paranoid of going, all right, now we're looking like a schizophrenic because it looks like we're kind of the same company, but now we're trying to have some connection or wit, or we're trying to stand for something bigger than just selling our product, but it's still anchored in that old one. And
Yeah.
so when they did decide to go, we're brooming everything except the name, literally except the name, Tony, the CEO, the story goes that Tony's reaction was, "Hey guys, I absolutely love the packaging. We're about to drop 30% of our sales, but I love the packaging." and and he was prepared to kind of take that big business loss. But ultimately the packaging they chose was one that made a great connection with people, made them smile, informed them about these sort of higher mission statements that the company was trying to ground themselves in, and so they did not drop 30%.
Yeah,
So it's
there's a
uh,
conviction, there's a conviction element there, isn't there? Because you've got to have that decisive, the ability to be decisive and convicted and say, if it's going to be 30%, it's going to be 30%, but I think it's better, and then going with that.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, and I do think the bravery of Oatly is a huge. It's been a huge contributing force to any and all the success they've had.
I could go on a tangent. Do you think there's enough bravery out there now?
No, not in the slightest. No, and I wish I knew why. So I've been chatting with different companies over the last month or so, just about what they need from a marketing standpoint. One of the needs that continues to come up is people going, "Hey, I don't necessarily need an agency, but we need our people to start thinking more creatively, to think a bit more bravely." And so I'm pulling together just sort of like a half day workshop type thing, and one of the kind of key tenets of that is to identify these sources of sameness.
Yeah.
Because I think there are just so many guiding forces leading people to do the same darn thing that everyone else in the category is doing, or do it slightly different so that they can feel good about their themselves. But ultimately, people don't, real people don't notice
No,
slight differences necessarily.
no.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's an inspiration. You know, I've been digging around as to like, okay, what is sort of the driving force here,
Mm,
and it does feel like a fear of losing your job in a time where jobs are a bit harder to come by. That definitely seems to be a contributing factor. But another big one is actually leaders of companies have not successfully created a culture where it's okay to fail.
yeah.
Because if you're okay to fail, then you're okay to take chances. And again, a ton of good things come from that, and that goes
Mm,
far beyond the marketing department. So I think if you're able to establish that yeah, we're totally going to make mistakes here, and then you're gonna get a lot richer thinking from your people. You're gonna get those risks
yeah, yeah.
that not all of them will pay off, but a bunch of them will.
It's fascinating. I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about this. I mean, as what I would do about it, but because I'm not in that game. But it did strike me the other day. I noticed. You'll remember some time ago, well, not everyone, but the big thing was selling mattresses online, right? And box them up, and you'd ship them to your house in a box, and it would unbox it, and it would inflate and become real or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
and the big thing was, of course, number one, it can ship in a box. Number two, you get 365 days trial and send it back. Well, now you look, the other day we were just talking about this, and I said, I can't tell you how one mattress company is different from another mattress company because they all ship in a box. They all have a 365-day return policy. Like, where's the Oatly of mattresses? I mean, that's just, it popped into my mind. Like, who wants to stand out? So they call themselves funny names like Purple or whatever. That's not enough. Not for me, at least.
Yeah. No, and I think every category has that. Every category has like these things that you just go, yep, this is what everyone does. And I really genuinely don't understand why you go into marketing and without this sort of in like inert need like to do something different to make your mark on behalf of your brand.
Yep.
I really can't figure out the follower mentality. It's amazing, but it's prevalent for sure.
What it means, though, is that there's a lot of space for people who are not followers, and a lot of opportunity to sort of
Totally.
stand out and stand apart, which I think is the exciting part. I do want to share one or two more things, and I would encourage people, if they haven't read
Sure.
the article, to read it. So you said something else, and I just thought that I loved. You said you don't believe the Oatly of today could have arrived through incrementalist thinking and evolution. It required revolution. That was a big piece, and I think a lot of companies, it's not even a 15-year cycle. I think it needs to be constant as they consider how to look differently. But then you said, remember, of course, no one cares. One of the most enabling aspects of working on Oatly was the freedom to openly admit that no one gives a shit about what we had to say. And then you challenged the readers to say, look, we haven't met, but I'm willing to wager that people feel the same about your brand too. And I think you're probably right on that one. And a couple of other things that just struck out. Knowing that people aren't listening also forced us into some behaviors that every brand could benefit from. I just think that those are just frankly deeply profound insights that leaders can, well, anyone, not just leaders, frankly, people in business can consider. How are we revolutionizing and not just evolving? Kevin, how
Yeah.
so I want to give you a little bit of the last word here in terms of you've done some incredible work, and you're doing incredible work now. How can people find you? What is the kind of work you'd like to do? Who are the kind of people you'd love to have conversations with right now?
That's a fine question, and thank you for the advertorial opportunity here. Yeah, so I've started a place called the Wrong Agency, and the Wrong Agency here in Malmö, Sweden, and the name and the rationale for the name is really because ultimately what we're trying to offer is is the environment that I described at Oatly and at Shanghai American School, like hire the people, trust the people, like don't be micromanaging, don't give some give the yeah, it really is just sort of giving the authority, giving the trust to people to do the job that you've hired them to do. It really is. um, there are a couple of sort of tenets of, like, look, you're allowed to approve an idea or not approve an idea. You're not allowed to change an idea. Like, I in 30 years of advertising, working with clients, and I've worked with some wonderful clients, rarely do I, walk out of a client meeting or a committee, even worse, with people going, yeah, just change this and this, change that, and going like, yeah, now it's even better. Like, no, it's never better. It's never better. So it's just trying to remove some of the processes and some of the thinking that again just sort of leads to mediocrity. In
Yeah,
terms of it's also structured so that the ambitions are structured so that, again, it recreates that opportunity to go deeper, similar to at Oatly or Shanghai American School. So I'm basically looking for three clients. um, I'm realizing that so many people have gone to project based that I might have to revisit the sort of what that number is. But the idea being, like, it's got to be a short list of folks so that I can stay involved personally, which I really enjoy. But also we can go deeper. We
yeah,
can hit points where it might not be something that they would necessarily prioritize, but that might be the moment if you made that special, really reverberates and creates sort of those earned conversations that brands benefit from. So if I had my sort of perfect way to describe who that would be, who those couple of clients should be, I would say I'm looking for Oatly circa 2013, which is to say, you've got leadership that has a lot of trust and faith in creativity and the power, that it can transform business, and your internal culture. Um, uh, Big ambitions. Oatly, I think, really, like, part of their laddering up strategically of standing for something bigger really was to say, hey, we want to be a guiding force in the transformation of the food systems of the earth. It's like,
yes,
that's pretty cool for a
huge.
tiny little company in Sweden. And then the third part is that in Oatly in 2013, the hard work wasn't done yet. I like the hard work. I think the hard work's the fun part. And so really, finding that type of company where they haven't, sort of figured some of these pieces out. They really are looking to that clean slate that Oatly kind of gave themselves. In a perfect world, we can find that as well. So yeah, I don't really care what category it is. I think it's really the opportunity to impact someone's business, through creativity and having the trust and faith to do so is a glorious thing.
Well, and the ability to take the lessons that you learned in terms of transforming what was Oatly to what it is today, I think are just terrific, and huge opportunity for people to take advantage of that and learn from that. We will make sure that we link to you and your site and all that kind of stuff when we share this as
Awesome.
well.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've really, it's I get inspired sort of through reading, and I'm so glad that I came across an article that I probably wouldn't have. Yeah, I don't read the drama. Probably wouldn't have gone there naturally, and I'm just so thrilled that we did, because I think there's so much in what you shared that beyond marketing teams, organizations can just take advantage of, and people can question if they're even in the right place. Is this where I want to be? Because I'm not feeling that energy. Let me go and find a place where I can do that. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. I certainly appreciate any effort you can have to evangelize some of that stuff to the C-level folks that you work with. Would leave a lot of people in better shape.
Oh, right. Yeah, it will, right? Absolutely. And I do.
Yeah.
I think keep the window open in terms of turning that article into something more, because I think there's so much in there that is worthy of a few chapters of kind of good, interesting reading. So this has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Kevin. Really, really appreciate this.
Hey, thank you so much, Russell. Yeah, I appreciate it. Take
Absolutely.
care.
Cheers.